In 1893, a newly ordained monk in the Dhutanga forest tradition of Theravada Buddhism began his more than 50-year journey wandering through the jungles of Thailand, Laos, and Burma on his personal quest to achieve Nibbana, whereby he would release himself from samsara and escape the perilous cycle of death and rebirth. cariya Mun was born in 1870 in Ubon Ratchathani, a province in northeastern Thailand. He was the eldest of 8 siblings and a man of small stature with a clever, energetic, and quick personality. He first ordained as a novice when he was 15, but gave up his robes after 2 years and returned to his lay life until he was 22, when he took leave of his parents with their blessing and set out for his ordination. His biography was compiled some 20 years after his death by one of his close disciples, Acharya Maha. Early on in his practice, cariya Mun's days were mostly spent in the acts of meditation. He perpetually reminded himself of the life and achievement of Buddha, and encountered many hardships in meditation until he brought his heart into the preliminary calmness that would be necessary to continue into the levels of samadhi. One night he had a dream of a large fallen jati tree, which was rotten and would not live on into another existence. cariya Mun saw this as a symbol of his destiny to escape samsara and become like this tree, dead to the world of suffering forever. cariya Mun understood he was destined to embody the life of a Dhutanga practitioner and train in the Buddhistic art of Dhamma and meditation that had impelled the great Lord Buddha Gautama to escape samsara more than 2,500 years before. He adhered to the 13 practices of a Dhutanga monk, which compel the practitioner to wear only robes made from discarded cloth, eat no more than 1 meal a day, eat only from the alms bowl which monks use to collect food from generous villagers nearby, wherever they are wandering or residing temporarily, refuse to accept food after one has finished the daily alms round, dwell in the forest, dwell at the root of a tree, in the open air in cemeteries, or wherever one happens to be or be initiated into, to sleep in a sitting position, and to not accept more than 3 robes. These deeply rooted practices better ensure the monk embodies simplicity and detachment, allowing the total focus of the chitta, or the consciousness, to win an all-out war on the kalisas, or defilements and impurities. And there is no doubt that for Mun this process was an internal, total war. Kalisas are the vices and obstacles in the path of Dhamma. These are the crafty forces of pride, greed, craving, laziness, lust, hatred, and self-importance in the heart that bind souls to continued lifetimes of dukkha, or suffering. Famously, the Buddha had come to understand and transcend this suffering in his revelation of the 4 Noble Truths. Quote, "When my mind was thus concentrated, purified, bright, unblemished, rid of defilement, pliant, malleable, steady, and attained to imperturbability, I directed it to the knowledge of the destruction of the taints. I understood it as it actually is. This is suffering. This is the origin of suffering. This is the cessation of suffering. This is the way leading to the cessation of suffering." One of the foundational visions, or nimittas, that propelled cariya Mun happened at Wat Liap, when he converged into a state of calm, and there arose a mental image of a grotesque corpse. This bizarre image became an object of continual contemplation until it suddenly morphed into a translucent disc, which could fluidly change its appearance as cariya Mun focused on it. This disc led to some of the initial psychic phenomena Mun experienced, but he understood after a time that one could become distracted by such phenomena to the point of straying from the path. But over the years he used his intuition to adjust his chitta and samadhi experiences into progress, lacking for a while the important mentor or master who could correct him and speed up his self-transformation. cariya Mun achieved a great deal of progress on his own, but did not recommend this to other monks. 3 times while Mun pushed the limits of his consciousness, he passed out in meditation and almost died. But death did not disturb him. In fact, he used these experiences to become immune to the fear of death, and for himself believed that his brushes with death and his willingness to die in order to breach samsara were necessary to the ultimate end. Much of Mun's life amidst the ancient ruins of Buddhist temples was spent in different forms of meditation, walking or seated, going on the daily alms round, and teaching other monks, who began to learn of his reputation as he traveled through the forests. He spent a good deal of time wandering Dhutanga with his mentor Acharya Sao, who commented on the more adventurous and extreme chitta of Acharya Mun. In this way, Acharya Sao did not always have the advice Mun might have been looking for, considering the 2 monks were dealing with 2 very different minds. And like Mun, Acharya Sao experienced his own quality of phenomena. He had a tendency to levitate while he was in samadhi, occasionally opening his eyes in the middle of meditation to find himself many feet off the ground. At once, the awareness of his own levitation distracted his chitta and caused him to fall to the ground and out of samadhi. Gradually, he trained himself to be able to bring his body safely back down while not being thrust out of samadhi. Acharya Mun as well began to experience an enormous range of phenomena as his practice progressed, phenomena which many rationalists of the West will surely refuse to consider. Suddenly, during body contemplation, Acharya Mun would feel himself sink into the earth, or conversely to shoot up and out of his body, where he could roam around for hours, exploring celestial mansions, and peering into various other realms of existence before returning. His fearlessness was further trained by the variety of dangerous encounters with tigers and dangerous landscapes in the wild. The prospect of tigers killing humans and dragging them off into the night was so accepted in some parts of Mun's world that villagers, namely in Vietnam, often hardly mourned the loss of their fellow villagers, while in other places people were in continual terror over the prospect of being killed and eaten. Mun thought that it was good to have these dangers lurking around a monk, all the better to train oneself to become accompanied to the ever-present prospect of death, and keep the chitta focused continuously on progressing toward nibbana. In one case, Mun used the danger of lurking tigers to keep his students on their toes, saying, "Anyone whose efforts are lazy, watch out. The tigers in this mountain range really love lazy monks. They find them especially tasty eating. So if you want to avoid becoming a tasty meal for a tiger, you had better be diligent." One of his rougher students used this advice to advance beyond the fear of death, making it a priority to travel to the most fear-inducing locations in the night, where he would be gripped by terror and either overcome it or die with a tiger's fangs closed around his neck. Living in the wild was an efficient way for monks to be propelled out of their comfort zones, where growth was instantly possible. Near Banglui village, Acharya Mun spent 3 years living in Sarika cave, after he had successfully endured the presence of a Lord Deva who dwelled in it. When Mun first arrived in the village, he learned about 4 monks and others who tried to practice in this cave, only to become the target of this crooked spirit, succumb to stomach pains, and eventually die. This was a huge, malevolent spirit, black and towering, who kept a trove of dangers in wait for anyone who intruded in his cave. But Mun was convinced that no spirit could threaten him, and the challenge of navigating the fear of the Deva in the cave was a perfect opportunity to advance his transformation. And so Mun climbed the mountain and entered the cave, where for several days his physical condition remained unchanged. Then, after many nights, a pain in his stomach grew and grew to the point of Mun passing blood in his stool. Then he failed to digest his food properly, and medicines from the villagers failed to treat him. So he thought he might be the next monk to die from the mysterious power in the cave. After no medicine could help him, however, he decided to engage the therapeutic powers of the Dhamma. He stopped taking all medicines, accepted the prospect of death, and focused all his power on healing himself through concentrating deeply on the physical signals and mechanisms telling his body it was in pain. Through this investigation, he succeeded in disengaging the body from pain, and at the moment of realization, he converged into samadhi, and his luminous chitta lifted out of his body. Instantly upon leaving his body, he was aware of the black towering Deva looming above and carrying a long metal club. The spirit menacingly pronounced he would pound Mun straight into the ground with it unless he flee the cave that instant. But cariya Mun was not moved. Instead, he questioned the Deva's motives and state of wellness, pointing out that he had come to the cave as a practicing monk and harmed no one. Mun said if the spirit thought he was so strong and smart, he would try and make himself like Buddha and release his hatred and paranoia. This mode of dialogue brought the Deva to a pause, and Mun took the opportunity to teach the Deva about the negative karma it was creating for itself through harming the visitors of the cave. After a long admonishment, the spirit dropped the club and admitted to being in wonder of the monk and his radiant aura. This being gradually revealed itself to be a celestial Deva in charge of the tribe of terrestrial Devas in that area, and went on to learn from cariya Mun and protect his meditations to ensure that he was not disturbed in the years that he lived in the cave. And it was in those years that disciples of the Buddha showed up spiritually in Mun's meditations and conversed with him over a wide range of subjects. cariya Mun's unique ability to commune with spirits did not stop in Sarika cave. Other powers of clairvoyance and clairaudience opened up, which aside from connecting him to countless Nagas, Garudas, Brahmas, and other celestial and terrestrial beings in meditation, also allowed him to send out his flow of consciousness to remote view people in distant locations, and read people's thoughts and even know their dreams. At the foot of the same mountain lived another elderly monk. cariya Mun once wondered what this other monk was doing one night, and so he sent out his flow of consciousness to take a look. Instantly, cariya Mun was aware of the distracted thoughts of this old monk, and the range of troubles and worries the man had which tortured his sleep and serenity. cariya Mun visited the house of this man after his next alms round, encountering the monk and letting the man know that he was aware of many details of his life and his exact concerns, despite having never met the monk before. But this monk went pale now that Mun demonstrated how much he knew of the man's innermost thoughts. And in a matter of days, the monk left the area entirely. It seemed too difficult for him to correct his thoughts or remain in the same area with cariya Mun, who could spy into his mind. Mun took this as a negative result of his lack of forethought, despite his benevolent intentions. If Mun had known how incapable this elder monk was in regards to changing his ways, or how embarrassed he would be, he would never have gone about it the way that he did. Ever since this, Mun tried to exercise caution in the careful business of telepathy. It didn't often matter how great one thought their intentions were, some people were better off being left to their ways. Mun's clairvoyant abilities became so well known, they served as an ever-present reminder among his students to wrestle down their vexatious thoughts and guard against the occasional stray idea, image, or desire born out of their kilesas. In the middle of a lecture, cariya Mun would not stop to lambast the specific monk whose thoughts went awry, but he would let them know by passing over the subject generally, fiercely deriding the occurrence of negative karma-creating notions arising in the minds of his students. Many times a monk would leave his teachings looking around and wondering who's in trouble today. And for those who knew Mun was reading their minds specifically, it could create a situation of extreme embarrassment, prompting the adequate correction. One time a monk who had been a boxer in his earlier life joined the monastic community but kept a number of old boxing photos with him in secret. cariya Mun learned about this monk during his meditations, his samadhi would suddenly be interrupted by visions of this new monk practicing his boxing stances. This distraction grew to the point that Acharya Mun publicly scrutinized the new monk, deducing that he was once a boxer, and was still too much attached to this practice to live as a monk. Once the new monk confessed to his photos and burned them, these visions ceased to arise in Mun's meditation. One monk once privately pondered the occasional ferocity of Acharya Mun's admonitions. Acharya Mun brought this up to the monk immediately, telling him his mind was like a monkey jumping around and soon to leap onto a rotten branch and fall into a heap. When his students would find themselves laying down or being lazy, an image would arise of Acharya Mun sitting in meditation at that very moment, scrutinizing their slack behavior. Naturally, this kept students on their toes and trained them to be on guard against their kilesas, so that immediately when they arise and become known, they can be routed and put to death. All it took on Mun's part to remind them was often one psychic glare. The path to Nibbana was, after all, not going to come to those who were constantly perturbed or working to silence the tsunami of the restless mind without uprooting its sources. Nibbana, called nirvana in Sanskrit, is earned and is not in reach for those who cling to any measure of worldly ambition or entertaining pastime. Acharya Mun was not of the mind to tolerate any lazy approach to this end, or confuse and dress down that end to make it more comfortable to the aspirant. He did often find that where his fierce rebukes failed and caused harm in a student not strong enough to weather harsh criticism, he had to adjust his tactics person to person. Though Acharya Mun stuck diligently to the common Buddhist practices and the Dhutangas, he did not by any means teach his students as if they were all the same person, capable of each walking the same path toward the achievement. Some students carried burdens of parentage and karmic attachments to a lover or a certain worldly practice that would require a different technique than those who were perturbed only by their restless mind after progressing up the first levels of meditative sagacity. On account of his students all being humans, they were possessed of a degree of potential and goodness by their nature. To squander this gift with continual negative acts, unruly behaviors, and lapses in kindness and discipline was to pursue only another rebirth into an even lower circumstance, adding yet another rung to the ladder, which every soul must climb to escape samsara and suffering. It was not expected that every monk reach the same escape velocity as that of the Buddhas. And should one achieve only the greatest karma and practice high morality, but not quite achieve nibbana and ultimate salvation, they would nonetheless be afforded a life in a realm with less suffering than the earth life, such as the various Brahma or Deva realms. But for Acharya Mun, there was no doubt that a soul could create incarnations into lower realms on account of their negative karma. This included various hellish realms where souls were tormented by their actions in a past existence, and animal realms where souls entered if they were, in their former lives, little more than beasts. These beliefs point to the rather unique dogmas of Theravada Buddhists, who adhere so strictly to the teachings of Buddha that they do not on principle consider how great a role forgiveness might play in the medley of spiritual forces at work on behalf of individual souls. But the practice of Acharya Mun is by no means welcoming to those who would stray even a little from the forest tradition or think themselves to be more clever than the Buddha. This was a practice achieved through the merit and progress of the individual soul in the Buddhist tradition, reliant on very few outside forces other than the teacher one has at hand and the generosity of nearby laymen. Down to the most detailed circumstance of personality, temperament, or proclivity, all could be explained by the complexities of an individual's karma, which to these Thai Buddhists was interpreted linearly. Even deities who were fond of certain souls would appear back into the lives of those same souls in their next incarnation to resolve or dissolve some cluster of karma they had mutually created. Mun believed in volitional intent, as the basis for the establishment of soul relationships over many lifetimes, especially if souls continued to get married. He also had much to say about avoiding negative karma within the family. Quote, "Mostly, people who go astray do so because they insist on having their own way. Without considering whether they're right or wrong, they want to personally dominate everyone else in the family, something which just isn't possible to achieve. Such arrogance spreads and rages, singeing others until everyone is scarred. Even worse, they want to exert their influence over everyone else in the world, which is as impossible as trying to hold back the ocean with your hands." Sometimes during Mun's instructions to monks late into the night, terrestrial devas would gather to learn from his talks, which were visibly seen by cariya Mun. For these devas would only show up at night, and when they did, Mun would enter samadhi in order to speak with them privately. These devas were always graceful and respectful, and some leaders among them would show up with followers in the tens of thousands, which was a symbolic manifestation of the level of the particular deva in question. Arahants who visited Mun in meditation also made it clear to him that Mun was only perceiving them in the mundane form of their former earth bodies, because that was the way the Arahants, or the disciples of Buddhas, chose to appear to him. Quote, "They must temporarily assume a mundane form in order to make contact." These kinds of phenomena were not unknown to other monks, often in Mun's local group, for they also reported many nights of visiting celestial or terrible realms, which they would do while their physical bodies were upright in sleep. In this way, these monks could roam freely during their 4 to 6 hours of sleep, when normal humans are aware only of the restlessness of their minds through the dream state. Furthermore, Mun taught that, quote, "The diversity of internal and external phenomena that can be involved with samadhi is limitless, the perception of them being limited only by each individual's natural inclinations. Those so inclined will naturally perceive such phenomena, and nothing can prevent them from doing so." All discussions Mun carried out with the devas were done through the universal language of all intelligent beings, the language of the heart. While we often think of this as psychic and telepathic, we should amend these from time to time to telepathic, emphasizing the heart-mind connection as a unit itself, which when separated is operating on less than half of its actual strength. This same language of the heart is what allowed Mun to tell tigers to go away, and know when elephants were not going to be aggressive, or to let monkeys know that he meant them no harm. Villagers would from time to time report a significant decrease in animal attacks and animal-on-animal predation whenever Mun came into the area to practice. The idea being that all it takes is one enlightened being in proximity for their surroundings to adjust to integrate this new frequency. In one instance, in the Ban Tham village in the Ta Kek district, after the entire village was suffering with smallpox, cariya Mun quickly taught them to worship according to the Buddha's teachings and cease with their worship of local spirits. He guided them each in their own practice, including chants and meditations. Before he arrived, people died daily from smallpox. After he arrived, no one did, and those who were infected quickly recovered. This was still well remembered by the present-day abbot of that local monastery at the time of the writing of cariya Mun's biography. Mun taught a certain kind of meditation which began with focusing on one particular challenge, be it a visualization, or the movement of energy coursing through one's body, or a meditation on death. At the point in the meditation when one's mind ceases focusing on the challenge at hand and converges into a state where there's no distraction of the mind, then the chitta has entered the first phase of samadhi, which contains enough momentum to maintain itself and prepare for the next phase. Of course, this practice goes smoother for those who have already corrected the initial noise-making of the mind and the kilesas that bombard us in our early phases of mindfulness. Continually removing kilesas and defeating them one by one, one's consciousness lifts into a higher threshold of challenges, where once again the mind must be called upon and one's own wisdom must be brought to bear. This was not meditation to simply achieve a mind free of thought, for this is just another method of ignoring one's problems and developing a new attachment to a state of ease and comfort. For Acharya Mun, there was always a need to rise higher, and it is due to his immense daily discipline that one time in the village of Ban Sam Phong, he was able to warn a group of monks to cease digging a well in the place where they were seeking to draw up water for the villagers. The monks, however, did not listen to this curt warning, and upon digging out a good portion of the well, the ground collapsed, almost causing severe injury. The monks tried their best to avoid bringing this up to Mun, until at last Mun confessed that he knew exactly what had happened, though he hadn't been there. His students were once again reminded not to doubt his precognition. For Mun understood the reality that the consciousnesses of all beings were overlaid with one another throughout all of the realms. As his disciple puts it, even though the flows of consciousness from each of these beings intermingle constantly as they pass through one another's sphere of existence, they are as oblivious of others as if theirs is the only group in existence. One Deva discussed with Mun the common situation of humans misidentifying greater celestial beings for ghosts or apparitions, paying them no careful consideration beyond their own impulsive assessment. If humans were more perceptive, then they would have much to learn from the Devas and other realms, realms which even souls currently in human form are able to pass into, or be born into depending on their present karma and the decisions they make in the transitional state of death. Thus, far from experiencing the world as the blackness behind his eyelids in meditation, Mun's world was filled with other beings and other realms, and although his body remained seated or walking gracefully here and there, his internal world was one of perpetual combat, victory, serenity, and ascension. "The time has come," Mun once said, "for me to put my life on the line and engage the Kalisas in a fierce, all-out assault, showing no hesitation or weakness. If I lose, then let me die while battling it out. I will not allow myself to retreat in disarray so that the Kalisas can ridicule me. That will be a lasting disgrace. If I am victorious, I shall remain perfectly free for all eternity. So now there is only one path for me to take. I must fight to the death with all my might for the sake of this victory. There is no other choice." A great deal of Mun's lifetime of training, which led to his eventual achievement of nirvana, which promised him a total escape from samsara, was to prepare for the moment of death. Buddhists give particular emphasis to this moment, warning against bringing any attachments beyond the pale. The moment of death was an extremely important window, and Mun understood that the soul's thought actions in this transitional state were paramount to what that soul attracted. Death is coming. It is up to the individual to determine how he or she is going to meet it. You are constantly worried about what you will eat and how you will sleep and how you will keep yourself entertained, as if the world were about to vanish at any moment and take everything with it. So you rush around storing up such a mass of useless stuff that you can hardly lug it around. Even animals don't indulge themselves to that extent, so you shouldn't assume that you are so much more exalted and clever than they are. The battlefield for conquering the Kalisas exists within each individual who practices with wisdom, faith, and perseverance as weapons for fighting his way to freedom. It is the heart alone that engenders all misjudgment and all wisdom, so you should not focus your attention outside of yourself. Since they are constantly active, pay close attention to your actions, speech, and thoughts to determine what kind of results they produce. During Acharya Mun's stay in Changdao Cave at the top of a mountain, he encountered a Naga who dwelled there. This Naga's temperament was to be constantly annoyed and hypercritical of everything around him. Anytime Acharya Mun breathed too loudly, stepped too softly or strongly, or rustled around during his practice, Mun would become aware of the Naga's harsh criticism, who still found problems with Acharya Mun after he'd adjusted his practice to try and please the Naga. Finally, he'd had enough of the Naga's foolishness, quote, "Criticizing other people's faults, even when they really are wrong, merely serves to increase your own irritation and put you in a bad mood. If you were a human being, you'd probably be incapable of living in normal society. You'd see the world as one big garbage dump and yourself as pure solid gold. Such feelings of alienation are due to emotional turmoil caused by your hypercritical attitude, which gives you no peace. I'm not the one who suffers from your criticism. It is your own emotional health that's adversely affected." For a long time, cariya Mun tried to teach the Naga to correct its actions, and the effort of the Naga to bring itself under control caused such a degree of consternation that Mun decided it would be better for everyone if he moved on. This story serves as another warning against ceaselessly perpetuating one's negative behaviors or critical attitudes. These are projections from an internal place of turmoil that only turn back against the entity in a vicious negative cycle. cariya Mun came into contact throughout his life with various hungry ghosts, Nagas, Yakas, Garudas, and Brahmas, speaking about them only with a great deal of caution, out of the risk these subjects could pose if they became distractions. He did share a story of his spiritual partner, who was not incarnated in an earth life during the time of cariya Mun, but was still perceptible in his meditations. They communicated with each other when this feminine spirit confessed to Mun that she was waiting for him in an intermediary realm, not wanting to go on with her journeys without him. cariya Mun eventually persuaded her to carry on with her own path and choose a birth in a paradise realm. After achieving nirvana, Mun learned in his meditation about the various ways Buddha's disciples met their deaths and what poses they took. cariya Mun knew when and where he was going to die, and at the appointed time when his physical health was failing him, his assisting monks carried him to Nakan, where in 1949, cariya Mun died, surrounded by disciples, monks, and laymen. There are a great deal of teachings and experiences worth investigating in the life of cariya Mun, who insisted that each of us think carefully about our conduct, correct our negative karma, and pursue a life whereby the moment of death may come without fear or doubt in our hearts. If you are too comfortable, go where you know your fear may find you again, and conquer it like the monk who conquered his fear of ghosts by walking straight to the place in the darkness where he imagined them to be. cariya Mun's harsher teachings were not given without compassion, but from a place of kindness and love for all life, knowing as he did that students often need to be rapped on the knuckles before they're finally convinced to cease grabbing a hold of things that do nothing but weigh them down and hold them back. I close this brief study into the life of a modern ascetic sage with his passage on the spiritual warrior, leaving us to take action in our lives to immediately uproot our defilements and cultivate true progress. That's how a true warrior in battle with pain gets the job done. Don't complain about the enemy's overwhelming numbers. Just dig in and fight them all to the limit of your strength and ability without flinching. Never withdraw your forces. Never accept defeat. Never let the enemy stomp on you while you're down. We within the circle of practice must be warriors. It is no use complaining how extremely painful an illness is. Just focus on the pain as it arises and try to understand its true nature. Regardless of how much or how little pain we experience, all pain is a manifestation of the truth of dukkha. Thank you for liking and subscribing, and shout out to all my patrons who've been connecting with me over recent weeks. Please consider supporting the channel with a one-time donation or through my Patreon, linked below in the description. Be well. Thank you.